Welcome to the Neurotech Network Real Stories, Real People series. Today, we're taking a different tack about neurotechnology. We typically cover people living with neurological conditions and their experiences with the technology. But what about the people who are developing it and the health challenges that they face? Today, you will meet Paul Rothweiler. He is the Technology Development Program Manager and MedWorks Director at the Earl E. Bakken Medical Device Center within the University of Minnesota. In this role, Paul has extensive experience in the development of a variety of medical devices. But instead of talking about his experience in medical device development, we're talking about his recent experience battling cancer and his journey to find a new experimental treatment. Paul was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the plasma cells. Plasma cells are white blood cells that make antibodies that protect us from infection. But in myeloma, the cells grow too fast, crowding out normal cells in the bone marrow that make red blood cells, platelets, and other white blood cells. Paul was considered high risk, and with each new protocol, he had worse and worse symptoms. After about 2 years, he was running out of treatment options, and the last 3 did nothing to the cancer. At this point, he was facing the kiss of death. Let's meet Paul. All right, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time out with us today. We appreciate you spending some time with us. So first, how about if you start off just introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about your profession, what you do for a living, and what do you do for your interests? What do you really enjoy in your pastime?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that you've heard the phrase, if you do what you do for a living, you never work a day in your life. And I've been very fortunate ever since I was very young. I was always interested in how things worked. And so I thought I was going to go to med school at one point, but I realized the lifestyle of a doctor is not that enviable. And I realized that being on the science side of healthcare, I could still enjoy the mystery of the human body without the terrible hours that the healthcare providers have to go through. So I think I chose the right path. But yeah, it's curiosity and how the human body works. That's what motivates me. That's what drives me. And the great thing is, working at the University of Minnesota in the Bakken Medical Device Center, we get the opportunity to work with every part of the healthcare system: orthopedics, cardiac, pulmonology, name anything. And we've probably done a case with one of those groups. And in my case, you're going to ask me about how I ended up being a patient. We even get to work with oncology, and I'm actually doing a research project with the first doctor that I worked on with my treatment from Mayo. We're now doing research into the disease that I have.
Paul, you mentioned earlier that you're working on a research project with folks in the oncology department. Tell us a little bit about your diagnosis, so you can give us a little background of what you live with today.
Sure. So it was very vivid for me because I used to get up every morning and run a 5K. That was my, the knee bone's connected to the leg bone kind of routine, and kind of getting the whole body in sync. And it was late December of 2018, and I noticed I couldn't do it anymore. And so I talked to many males of my age, and they say the same story, right? I'm healthy. Why should I see a doctor? And so I didn't have a primary care physician kind of in my Rolodex. So I started talking to some of the people at the university about who would they recommend as a primary care. And so I hooked up with him. And within 3 months, I went from not being able to run a 5K to laying on my back. So it was pretty quick. And most of the symptoms were due to kidney failure. So the cancer produces an overabundance of proteins. and those proteins clogged both of the kidneys. So the first thing I had to deal with was kidney failure, acute kidney failure. So my loving wife, my daughter's a PA, and it's kind of funny because, again, I denied being sick, laying on the sofa, and they said, "Get in the car." And I was like, "I'm okay, leave me alone." And so I did do it. I had both of them looking at me, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to win this battle 2 against 1. So I got in the car. They took me to the ER, and it was eye-opening because my potassium was 6.5. And if you don't know about potassium in the heart, that's basically how they handle death row, is that they give you an overabundance of potassium. It stops your heart. So as you can imagine, it was quite the flurry in the room. It went from very calm, one person, pulling blood work, to there must have been 6 or 7 people in that tiny little ER room, and a lot of flurry, a lot of voices. And before I knew it, I was admitted to the hospital. They did get the potassium down, evidenced by I'm here. And then it was through the blood work that the nephrologist said, "I'm seeing something called an M spike." And once you get to know cancer, you'll know what an M spike is. And so he called a friend of his, who was an oncologist, to come over to the hospital, and he met with me. And his recommendation was that we were going to treat this cancer, and I could leave the hospital if I promised to show up at his clinic the next Monday, which was like Friday. So I got the weekend off and went over. From there, I needed more intense treatment than they could provide. So he hooked me up with somebody he spent his residency with at Mayo, named David Dingley, and he's considered a world-renowned myeloma specialist. And that's when the 4-year journey that I'm on now began.
Yeah. You mentioned that that you were a runner before.
Yes.
So in what other ways
In
did you
my head,
gain?
I'm still a runner.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. So, but in what other ways did you living with this condition change your life?
Well, yeah, it definitely made it difficult to remain a runner. Right now, because of the treatment that I received, I'm now a walker, hoping to become a runner again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the biggest thing is all of a sudden my life had a lot more people in it. Right? You still have the same number of friends, you still have your family, but now I've got probably 100 people that I correspond with, talk to by phone, meet with, uh, just to keep me going. You've got your, in my case, oncology, hematology, and then you've got your PAs, you've got your registered nurses, you've got your phlebotomists, the lady at the desk that checks you in for. They all know your story. They know you by your first name. They know more about you than probably you do. Your universe gets a lot bigger really quickly. There's comfort and there's discomfort in that, especially if you consider yourself semi-private.
Yeah, definitely. Now you mentioned, you've been through some of the typical treatments of cancer, but you've also gone through some extraordinary treatments, and let's focus on the extraordinary that maybe people really don't know all that about. So tell us on a layman's terms, because I know you're a scientist, but tell us on a layman's terms of this new treatment that you've embarked on, and how you found out about it.
Yeah. The handle is called CAR T, which is chimera, right? Which is a Greek word meaning part animal, part something else, right? and you can look up examples in Greek literature. So antigen receptor T cell. So the acronym is CAR-T. What is significant about this and should be celebrated, I think, is our understanding that trying to deal with the human body, sometimes it's better to use the things that the human body has as the tools. And so we're now getting into a phase where, at least for the cancers, we're taking the T cells and we're using that as the agent to attack the cancer. So we're looking for ways to, how can we increase the T cells' abilities, right? So in the case of the CAR T, what they'll do is they will take your T cells and they'll use a viral vector. There's a mouthful for you. But, we all know what a virus is. And we know that viruses are good at inserting material into a cell so that it can propagate and make more viruses. Well, if you take a viral vector, it's not going to do that. It's going to take if you want to call it a load, like in a ammunition, it's going to take what you put into that virus into the T cell, and they then grow those T cells until they get enough to put them back in your body. So you go through something that's like pheresis for those people that have ever donated blood. Nice big machine with very complicated looking filter system to pull the T cells out of your blood. They ship that off to the lab, use the viral vector, return the modified T cells, and put that back in the patient, or in my case, me. So my T cells are now genetically modified, if you want to think of it that way. So what they modified it with is a protein that binds to what's called BCMA. So the interesting thing about cancer is that BCMA, other than it does show up in your hemoglobin, it doesn't really show up in other tissues. So you've got something that directs that T cell right to the cancer and not to other targets that you don't want influenced.
What?
There's your CAR T, and
That's our CAR T, and
pieces.
exactly.
Yeah.
So how did you learn about this? How did you find out? Because this is still an experimental treatment.
Well,
How did you find out about it?
well, then being in my job, literature searches are very common. So occasionally I would, like on lunch breaks or coffee breaks, or I would do searches. I would look things up. Libraries are wonderful things, and they're all now available to us right at your keyboard, right? And I did talk, it was brand spanking new in 2020 when I first started reading about it. And I did talk to my care team, and they said, no, it's not for you. And I didn't understand what that meant. A lot of times you're going to see with experimental materials that you have to go through a certain number of standard of care treatments before you'll be allowed to take on something that's a little more risky. So I had to go through the process of literally failing or different treatments before they finally said, okay, this guy's not going to be helped by standard of care, so we need to allow him access to some of this cutting edge material. And that's how the journey for most of us.
Yeah. What was there's deciding factors that everyone makes on choices in life and choices in treatments. What were some of the risks that concerned you, or that crossed your mind before you decided to proceed with this experimental surgery or treatment, I should say?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd like to think that you look at, what do you want your life to be? And then from that, it should shake out what treatments you're willing to do, right? some of the treatments will cause damage to the nerves. And those are in the standard of care as well. And I was very concerned because I do have a hobby playing guitar. It's my one thing that I've always been able to do whenever I want without having to work up anything to do it. I just pick up a guitar and I'm there. It's a very convenient stress reliever. And I did have neuropathy in my toes, but I only had neuropathy in my fingers occasionally. And so it didn't really cause a problem. When it came to this CAR T, there are some side effects, well-known side effects. One of them is neurotoxicity. And if you think about the job that I have and how I like to use my brain solving problems, that should have scared me off. But I also saw that the numbers of people that were having neurotoxicity was rather low. It was like 5%. So I had to ask myself the question, is a 5% low enough to take the risk? And considering that the standard of care, all the issues that I had to deal with, the nausea, the lack of energy, everything that comes with the current treatment, I thought to myself, yes, this is something that I'm willing to take a risk on, because I certainly am not enjoying the side effects of what they call the standard of care.
Yeah. How many people have had this experimental?
I don't know an exact number, but
Mm-hmm.
if you look at literature, the numbers are growing rapidly. There's looking at leukemia and other forms of cancer. They're even looking at using it in what we call solid tumors. The downside to the solid tumors is, yes, solid tumors rework your body to feed its lots of blood, but the flow of blood through the tumor is low. And so CAR T has a tendency to not work well in those situations. So you philosophically decide, well, you cut out what you can and you treat what remains with CAR T, and that might be a way to approach that. Don't know. Still very early on.
Yeah. So those, you mentioned the risks and some of your concerns going into it, but
Mm-hmm.
what were your expectations? So here we go. We're going to go into an experimental treatment. What were your expectations going into it?
Well, my hopes were that I would get rid of the nausea, get rid of the fatigue, get rid of all of the problems with the current treatments, and to start working back towards what I would consider my life, right? Running 5Ks. So right now I'm walking 5 miles a day, and I'm increasing speed. And I believe that within the next month, I'll actually start running at not a great pace, but I'll be running, which is more like what I envision myself to be. I've had no nausea. I'm not fatigued. So as far as I can tell, I'm feeling like my old self. The downside is we know enough now that eventually the cancer will mutate, and that protein that they put into the T cell won't be as effective because the surface of the cancer cell will have changed, that the binding affinity will be lower. So then we'll have to go to whatever is the next cutting edge technology and keep moving. And that's hopefully someday we'll end up with something that looks like a cure. But I would say what we've been able to achieve, I hate to sound like an old guy, but I remember in the 70s when friends or uncles or somebody would tell you they have cancer, the big C word, you were preparing to say goodbye to them. And now, thanks to a lot of research and a lot of work, we're now considering it more chronic than terminal. and that's great. That's fantastic. Medicine, healthcare, we started, the government started making a focus on doing research in cancer in the 40s. So within 80 years, less than 100 years, we've come a really long way.
Yeah. So thinking of that, you think of it in the big picture and from a historical sense, but how did you manage your expectations going into it and then
I didn't.
coming out?
I just kept hoping for large things, and they came. I really didn't manage my expectations. I'm sure that my care team would have appreciated if I did, because they didn't want to make a promise and it not come to fruition and then have to deal with disappointment. But I have not been disappointed.
So Paul, we all learn from each other's experiences of our journeys and dealing with, chronic conditions. What have you learned along the way? And what would you like to pass on to others that might encounter a traumatic or chronic diagnosis?
Have faith. Um, I think the story that I just said about how we've gone from a death sentence to a chronic situation that's livable, right? I'm able to carry on what I consider my normal lifestyle right now. That there are people who are working very hard on all forms of disease and uh, dysfunctions, that just have faith that what's coming out of all of this research is going to benefit you. Um, a lot of times I think about that, being in the 70s and thinking the heavens above that I wasn't diagnosed in the 70s, right? So as we move forward, all patients should have faith that some of the technology that's coming out is mind blowing. The things that we're able to do now, and it's, of course, we're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. They had to start the journey with very little background about what the pathology is, what's the cause of the sickness. And now we've got so much information about a lot of things, and and we're able to manufacture things both on the, for example, the CAR T side to the electronics side, micro chips, and micro sensors and micro stimulators, that just have faith that if you can hang in there and keep going, there's a good chance that the treatments are going to get better and better and better.
What did you learn along about yourself along that way?
I'd say my focus has shifted for my life. I am, most of us are, but I am the product of my environment. My environment was, to paraphrase my mother, get good grades, get a good job, and you'll have a good life, right? And so I think my primary focus was on, staying the path. And now I'm at a point where I'm still showing up and doing my best, but I'm also being a little more purposeful in ensuring that I take time for myself, I take time for my family and friends. Uh, so there, I haven't strayed from the path, but I've added more things to my to-do list.
And give us that one of those things that you have on your to-do list that you've added.
Well, we always would try to take a decent vacation every few years. And I think we've probably accelerated that because we know that this treatment will be good till about February. And then we're back into a question of what's next. Hopefully it'll go longer. But if you look at all the statistics so far that have been gathered on this, it looks like about February, we'll have to start talking about what's next. So I think things like vacations are now accelerated and more purposely put on the calendar instead of, yeah, wouldn't we like to go do this? Well, now it's going on the calendar. It's going to
Excellent.
happen.
Excellent. Well, that's great advice for everyone that wants to, that is, has experienced any type of condition or tragic experience. So thanks, Paul, for sharing your story. And we
Oh, you're
appreciate you
welcome.
being with us.
Thank you for having me.